So we may get to this database today, so go ahead and download that. But let's just take a look. Oh, I was going to post. That's the thing I forgot to post. Let me go ahead and get a link for you. I am not a robot. Should realize I'm already signed in. But you put a link in here. Here's the link. We'll open it. Okay, there's the link. You can either type it in or you can go refresh your page on Learning Suite. But just goo.gl 7yk1. I don't know what that is. If that's an I or a L.
It's a J.
That's a J? Oh yeah, it is. Where that should take is, it should just take us to a web interface. It's like that same picture. We now have a user, but instead of working with Excel, I'm working with a web page. That web page knows how to communicate with the database engine that knows how to get access to the data. And so here's the idea, is that I can put in some structured query language statement, and if you read the whole chapter for today, you're crazy, because it was really, really long. It was like, the author is like, well, we've got to teach you all of the structured query language, so we can teach you how to work with databases here in Excel. So this is a structured query language statement. It just says select all the columns from the table called customer that's in the schema called redcat. So we could have like different applications. It's like the redcat data. So I could have a customer table in 4 or 5 different kind of applications in the same database. So we call this a schema, and we call this a table. That's probably not critical, but you just think of that as the resource I'm requesting the data for. So I hit submit. This interface I'm working with sends the request to the database engine. The database engine looks at the structured query language, processes it, sends back the results, and I see it. So this is exactly what we're going to try to do inside of Excel. In fact, we'll probably go for this same data. Actually, this data, this interface truncates it at 50 records unless you specify something differently. But I think this has like 4,000. So let's pick a particular state. So I'll restrict this to just one state, where state equals Virginia. I don't know how many customers we have in Virginia. So just like in VBA, if I have a string literal, I have to identify that literal with some kind of quotes. Turns out, thankfully, in VBA, the string terminator or delimiter is a double quote. In structured query language, it's a single quote. It makes it a little bit nicer for us to be able to put the single quotes inside the double quotes, which we'll have to do. But now if I execute this, it should be only, you'll see here we've got Virginia, New Hampshire, MA, is that Maryland? Oh, that's MD, what's MA? Maine? Massachusetts. Oh, Massachusetts. South Carolina, West Virginia, whoever. Now, if I submit this, we should have only Virginia. And there's more than 50 records, but I'm not sure how that works. Okay, anyway, questions on kind of the idea of working with a database? All right, so let's pull this same set of records now into Excel. The first thing that we're going to see is that I need to open up a blank workbook. So I'll go ahead and open up a blank workbook. I want to see if it changes to this? Sure. Okay, so what we're about to see is that it's possible to bring data into Excel from a database. If all I want to do is read data, I don't need VBA at all. So let's just see that, because if you're maybe a data person working with Excel, something you should know. So I'm going to come to the Data tab, and we've done some stuff early in the class on getting data from some kind of web site, but we have other kinds to work with here as well. So I want to get data from existing connections. And I'm not used to seeing this. Existing connections? Not existing connections. Is that how it is? Yeah, but I'm not sure which one it is. And these little small things. It's this one. Recent sources.
The one with the little yellow thing in the corner?
Web.
No. One and over to it.
This one?
I think so.
No, I didn't.
Oh.
Oh, here we go, from database. There's what I want. Okay, so it's actually, for me, it's on this get data. Depending on what version of Excel you have, even what version of Excel 2016 you have, this might look a little different. But ultimately, we need to find the one that says from SQL Server database. So there's other ones that are kind of built in here from an Oracle database, IBM DB2 database. The truth is, I'm not sure these work directly out of the box. Typically, we have to install some other stuff to go to Oracle, but let's just go with SQL Server. SQL Server is, of course, the Microsoft kind of heavy-duty database engine, and so kind of not surprisingly, they make that one the easiest to work with. So we're okay? We're finding this okay? I'm going to select this, and now it's going to ask for all kinds of information about what database I want to connect onto. The database we're connecting onto is called data.websql.org. In fact, if I'm just going to come back here to my web page, I'm going to click on Show Options here on this web page, and that connection is specified right in here. And so the server you can see is data.websql.org. That is the connection that we're after. The database is also specified over here. It's called user data. So I'll put in the database as user data. I wonder what the advanced options are. They don't look very interesting, especially since I can't get to the bottom. Can I go back to the advanced options? I'll just say OK. Okay, so now it's saying, great, how do you want to connect on to that? How do you want to be authenticated here? So that's one of the things that the database engine is doing, is it's providing security. It's saying, listen, we're only going to let the people who are allowed to have access to this data have access to it. So we've got to have some kind of credentials. The default way for working with a SQL Server database is that it's configured to know your identity when you log into Windows. This SQL Server we're connected to has no idea who you are. And so we're not going to use that one. We'll use alternate credentials. The username is demo. The password is also demo. Yeah, it's kind of like wide open. The good news is, for me, is that this account doesn't have very many permissions. But there it is. Which level to apply these settings? Yeah, data.websql.org should be fine. And we'll say connect. Could these credentials, try again later. Did everyone get that same thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
I love it.
Really? Sure. BYU secure. What am I forgetting?
You have to choose database instead of Windows.
You typed demo wrong the second time.
I don't think so. I don't think everyone typed it wrong. All lowercase. My caps lock's not on.
Let me try it.
Connect one more time. I'm going to try the second one here. Oh, you mean change this here to database?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's what I want to do. It's a little bit different than the last time we did it. Let's try to get your demo. Oh,
Looks like it's working. It has to be.
and connect. Encryption support. The source support. I'm okay with that. Whatever that said, I'm okay. Oh, good. That looks like it's connected. Whew. So yeah, I missed that thing. Someone said that. Hey, there's the database tab over there on the left. So we found that. If you're not getting connected and you would like to get connected, let us know, and we can help you. Oh, one thing to realize is that you've got to be on the BYU Secure Network to do this. If you're on BYU Guest says, listen, you're a guest here. You can check your email. You can browse the web. That's it. You want to connect to a database? Authenticate. And so they want you on the secure. That BYU guest network is really restricted in terms of what traffic it will allow to flow on. Did I see a question in the back?
Yeah, mine's not connected.
Everyone wants to see what you can do there?
Yeah.
Okay, so once we get connected, this then presents all of the resources on this server that you have access to. And so I'm just going to come down and scroll down until I find the Red Cat schema, and then I'll just find customer. Red Cat, let's see, sale, purchase, product, customer, there it is. It's previewing, there's the customer table. That looks delightful. And I'll just then click on load. Where am I going to put it? I'll just put it like in A1. Hopefully, that comes back. There we go. getting external data. It's thinking about it. It's coming, hopefully. Actually, this is kind of an old server that runs at my home. And so all of you accessing it might be having a little more trouble than a database that's meant to handle a lot of concurrency.
What was the name of that one?
It was redcat.customer was the name of the table that I brought in. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. This is the end of this part of the example. So as long as you get any table coming in, that'll be good. Anyone get data? Ah, there, I got it. So that's it. And folks, this really is, it's a query connection, which means that if this data changes, this is refreshable. So I should be able to come to data and refresh all. I'm not going to do it because it takes a few seconds to count. But it will call all that data back again. It'll just say, data's changed, might have changed. Bring it all in again and see what it is. So what are there? 4,417 rows loaded here. So I brought all that data in. So that's the first thing to realize is that we don't even really need VBA if all we're going to do is consume data. But if we want to change data through Excel, VBA is going to be our friend. That's going to be a kind of a VBA experience. Questions here? Okay, that comment about don't ask questions so we can get through both lessons today. I really would rather have you ask questions.
Sorry about that.
Well, that was cease. By the way, did your team win when you went?
They did not. The first time since '94 they've lost to the Lions. So
Good
it was
day.
a momentous occasion.
Good day for the Lions. You were there for a momentous event.
Yeah,
So,
it was record-breaking.
Oh, that means we brought a new sheet. Sheet 2 is there, and then sheet 1's here. Okay. So then, let's take a look at doing the same thing through VBA. We ready? So, Alt F11. I'm going to make sure that I'm on this correct workbook. Got my func res here to get that. I'm going to insert a new module, making sure that I'm on whatever worksheet that we're on. I'm on book 22. It looks like I made a bunch of workbooks. I'm probably on book 1 or 2. Insert a module. Sub get data 1. The first thing we have to do is add a reference. We'll talk about this in a second. I'm going to put a comment here, so when we look at this code, we know we have to do this. REFPRENC. Add a reference to the Microsoft ActiveX Data Access Object Library. It seems like once before we've added a reference. So here's the idea: is there's a bunch of stuff that's part, a bunch of functionality that's part of the VBA language. It's like loops, like if statement, exit for, opening files. That's all part. It's all built into the language. And then there's a whole lot of functionality that we have access to because it's just the objects that are sitting around in Excel. It's not part of VBA. But, we have to be able to manipulate cells and sheets and workbooks and charts and shapes. Those are all other functionality that's built into Excel and just readily available. And then there's a potload more of other kinds of functionality that's not available by default. We have to tell it, I'm going to want to use this other set of objects. And so that's what we're doing right now. This idea of using VBA to connect to an external database and say, you know what? That's not normal. We're not going to make that available unless you tell us you want that functionality. And so that's what we have to do. We're going to start off by saying we need to be able to have access to these set of objects. And so that's what the Microsoft ActiveX Data Access Library is. I'm going to choose Tools, References. And then I'm going to scroll down until I find Microsoft Active. There's a lot of these, by the way. You could really add a lot of functionality. Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects. 6.1 library. Now, it's not enough just to click on it and make it blue. You've got to check the box. And make sure you have this one, ActiveX Data Objects Library. The truth is, I've got 6.1. We could probably go all the way back to 2.1. These are just older versions of the same objects. Those will be fine. But if you accidentally get this next one, like this Data Objects Record Set, that's the wrong one. It's got to be ActiveX Data Objects 6.1 or one of the other numbers. I'm guessing you all have 6.1.
How did you get to references again?
So that's Tools References.
And they're gonna say,
Tools References. And once you've selected it, and you make sure that the checkbox is there, click OK, and we're good. What that does is it gives us access to a new set of objects. So we've got properties and methods that we can use to interact with databases. And until we bring in some kind of object to do that, we won't be able to, because it's not native. It's not a native part of Excel. It's not a native part of VBA. So we have to say, hey, someone wrote some libraries. And we're going to use those objects, definitions of objects, or object classes, object class definitions. Okay. Are we struggling at all with the library thing, with the reference? If you have already gotten the reference, raise your hand. If you're trying to get the reference still, but haven't quite, raise your hand. Hopefully Aaron's helping the guys in the back. Okay. So now we'll say okay, make sure we got it checked, we'll say okay. So now we've got new data types that we haven't had before. Whenever we work with a database, no matter what we're doing, we have to get connected to that database. So step one, we got to get connected. So I'm going to declare a variable to handle the connection object. Dim cn, short for connection, as an ADODB dot connection. When you type in ADODB dot, you don't get some choices. You didn't get the reference right. Once you've got the reference, it is ActiveX Data Objects Library. ADO stands for ActiveX Data Objects. So that's what we're after. So at this point, if it didn't pop up and give you a choice for connection, let's make sure we get you connected. Okay, to that reference. All right. So now there's another object that we're going to need. So in this case, what we're going to do, the task here is to connect it to that database, to ask it for a set of records, and let it send the records back to us. And then once we have that set of records, we'll do something with it. And so we're going to need another object for that. We're going to need a record set as an ADODB dot record set. You need help here? Yeah. So we're going to use the connection to establish a connection to the database. And the record set will get us access to a particular set of data. Realize that we can open up one connection to a database, and we can say, you know what, we need 12 different record sets to work with all at once. We can declare a bunch of different record sets, have one connection, 12 record sets that are built on that connection. We're going to do just one today. Now, a couple other things that we're going to need. I'm going to need some way to specify the connection, all the information about the database. I'm going to do that in a string. I'm going to call that a connection string. I'll just call it CS, the regular old string. And I'm going to need to formulate a structured query language request for those records. I'll also just want that as a string. So I'm going to dim SQL as a string. And these four variables, maybe I'll dim one more. Let me dim R as, we'll hold off on that. We may make another one later. It might be in a different example. Let's see, I'm going to use a little instructions here. How do you do that? You do this by saying tools, references, MS something. Okay, so step one is to open the connection. Oh, hold on a second. So when I do this just the way it is, the way I've done it here, I have allocated just enough memory to hold a reference to the object. That's perfect if the object already exists. But this object doesn't exist yet. So what I'm going to do is I've got to tell VBA to create that object. There's a couple different ways to do it. Here's the short way. I just put the keyword new right here. By putting the word new before the data type, and when this line gets processed, it's like, oh, you want this variable to refer to this kind of object. But not only that, you actually want to make one of these objects, and you want to hook up the variable to that object. We can do all that. All that can happen with the dim statement by putting new right there. So now I've actually, this will now create the connection object. and it will bind this variable onto it. So now I can say cn.open. I'll hit space, and it'll come up with the option. So, first thing is the connection string. I better actually give it the connection string. So let me do this. I'm going to put CS here. I still have to build that string. The next parameter is the user ID. I'm just going to put here demo. The next one is the password. Demo. Truth is, it's really not such a great idea to put a username and a password right in the code. So if this was something that you really needed to protect, we'd have a different way to do it. You might build a user form that prompts the user to type in their username and password, or you might store it somewhere else and encrypt it and use a different way to. It's beyond what I've taught you here, but just we're putting the username and password here into the code for expediency here, so you can see how it works. It's not necessarily an example of the best practice for handling passwords. All right, so let's establish that connection string. CS equals some string. Fortunately, the connection string is actually specified over here in this web interface. So where it says connection, that's the connection string I want. It has the minimal set of parameters that I need to be able to connect onto a SQL Server database. So what we're saying is hey, what kind of connection is this? It's a SQL Server connection. What server are we connecting to? Data.websql.org. What database is it? It's the user data database. And so we have to have at least those three items. You always have to tell it what driver to use, because that tells the connection, how do I talk to this database? These databases are it's like speaking foreign languages to these databases. Fortunately, the structured query language part's pretty common, but exactly how it interacts, the front end interacts with the engine, there's some nuances there, and so we have to inform the connection, hey, you're going to be talking to a SQL Server database. And it goes, great, I know how to work with SQL Server. And then we have to supply these other two things as well. This gets us to the server, this gets us to the database on that server. So now, when we say open, we open that connection string, we supply a username and a password, and that should open. Generally, folks, when you say .open, in your mind you should say, I bet I'm going to need to say .close somewhere. And so before I forget, I'm going to do that right here, right now. So I'm going to say cn.close, and I'll work between those. So we've opened the connection, we've closed the connection, and now, while that connection is open, we're going to do something with it. So far, so good? How many of you are going, he's going way too fast today? All right, so now we need some way to tell the server what it is that we want. And so I'm going to pull that from over here as well. And you can type this in, but I've already got it here, so I'm going to copy it. This is my SQL, so I'll say SQL equals, and I'll just paste that SQL in. So we've got to be a little bit careful here because I've got double quotes and single quotes together. They're right next to each other. It's kind of hard to tell what's what, but this is just a string, nothing magical here. This is a collection of characters as far as VBA is concerned. And in fact, when we think about it, that's the reason we make a string literal, right? Is we're telling VBA, don't try to understand this. It's not a variable name, it's not the name of an object. It's just a collection, as far as you're concerned, it's a collection of characters. You hold on to them, we'll do something with them later. And first of all, when I look at this, select star from red cat customer where state equals Virginia, is that something that's going to get processed? Is that something that's going to get executed? Absolutely. But who's going to execute it? Yeah, some SQL Server out there somewhere is going to execute it. VBA doesn't know what to do with that. And so even though that's an executable statement, it's not executable by VBA, and so we're just putting it as a string. VBA, hold on to this. Now, depending on what you're developing, you might have logic in here that builds the structured query language statement, right? Can you imagine some kind of a form that says you want to do customers? Great, pick the state from a drop-down list. They pick the state, and then you use that information to build out a string that looks just like this. So actually having it hard-coded in this would be kind of unusual, but again, simplified so you can see how it works. So now I'm ready to open the record set, rs.open. So this is my record set object. We declared it up here. It has an open method just like the connection does. The source is, what data do you want? I want SQL. That's the whole statement that we just defined here. The next thing that I need to know is, what's the active connection? What do I put here? CN, yeah, that's the connection that I've specified and is open. So would it be possible if we would have two connections open at the same time? Yeah, okay, I have a connection to SQL Server. I could have a connection open to a different SQL Server or to an Oracle database or an Access database, and I could be reading data from one, doing something with it, putting it into another one. So I got to tell it, this record set, what connection is this on? And then there's a bunch of other information about what we might, how we might want this record set to behave. We'll accept the defaults on all the rest of those. Now, I just said rs.open. What should tick in my mind immediately? rs.close them. I'll just put that here at the end. This should get me hooked up to that database. And I've got now access to that data sitting right there. Turns out that with Excel 2010, yeah, 2007 still, this part won't work for you. But beginning with Excel 2010, there's a really great new method for a range object. Watch this. We'll just put in the active cell. Active, for this example, active cell dot copy from record set. There's like, the range itself knows how to suck data out of a record set. I got to tell what record set to pull it from, so the record set is RS. And so now, when I execute that method, it's going to say, okay, we've got the record set. First of all, do you think that record set, all the data from this record set is going to fit in the active cell? No, there's a lot of data here. It's like 4,000. Well, it's not. The data with all the records is 4,000. I don't know how many people are in Virginia. So it's actually going to be not just the active cell. The active cell is where am I going to start? So we'll start there and bring in that whole record set. So let me make sure I got the active cell in a reasonable place. Over here on sheet 1, I'll put it C4. That's an explosive location, C4. And we'll execute this. It should connect onto that database and just pull all of that data in. Very nice. So it looks like we've got 155 or so customers that are in Virginia. 156? Yeah, that makes sense. I said Ursa. That's Ursa.
It did work in 2007.
It did.
Yeah. Copy from record set.
Okay, so that's one thing. If I'm just trying to bring data in, then, and that's a common thing to do, then I can do that. But that's really all I'm doing. I'd probably just do it through the interface, right? That can be the same thing. So, next task is we are going to copy get data 1, the whole sub-procedure, and we're going to paste it as get data 2. So, it's going to be exactly the same as get data 1 is, but we're going to do something different. Rather than just dump the data in, we're going to see what does it take to process those records right in VBA. So I might not want to put the data there. I just want to go through these records in memory and then decide what to do with it. And in fact, it could be, I have a database with like millions of records. Would it make sense for me in Excel to interact with a database that has more records than would fit on a worksheet? Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, databases have, it's really common to have like tens of millions of records to have to deal with. I did a database just since we started this semester in Access that had 6 million records in one table. I was actually surprised that Access handled it. It didn't handle it very well, but it handled it. So, yeah, it's more than, why did I do it in Access? It couldn't fit into Excel. I would have probably done it in Excel, but it wouldn't fit. So, okay. So this approach may not be available to us. So I'm going to get rid of this one. That's still available down in Get Data 1. We'll leave that example there. But here in Get Data 2, we'll do something different. So it turns out that when I say open, when I open my record set, it does not get all the data. The record set doesn't get all the data. In fact, the record set just gets one record. So when I say open, all it does is it gets the first record. And so that's an interesting thing is that the record set, I only have one record at a time to work with. And so if I want to go through all of the rows at my table, what am I going to need to do? What structure in VBA will I need to employ? A loop. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do until rs dot, there's a method, maybe it's a property. It's property, EOF. Do until rs dot EOF. What does EOF stand for? End of file. It's not really a file, it's a table, but that's what they call it. Now I'm going to put down here loop. If I forget to to put something inside this loop that advances what record we're looking at, I'm in trouble because I've just created an endless loop. Because this is going to continue looping until we get to the end of the file. If I don't tell it to get to the end of the file, to move each time a little bit, I'm never going to get to the end of the file. So just before the loop, I'm going to come in here and say rs.call method, move next. So now I've built this loop right here that will iterate, and I'll be looking at a different record each time I go through the loop. Okay, so now let's go ahead and write this out to the active sheet. I'm going to bring a new sheet here, and this one we're going to start in A1. So I'll need some way to control which row I'm looking at. So now I'm going to declare another variable here, dim r as long. And I guess just before the loop, I'll set r equal to 1. I'll set r equal to 2. And then we're going to say cells r comma 1 dot value equals. And now we want to read something off the record set. Now remember, that record set, I have access to only one record at a time. But I have access to all the columns simultaneously. So I can pick which column or which columns I want to work with. So let's just say we're going to pull out the first name and the last name. So here's how I get to a value that's in that record set. So RS, we get the record set. It has a collection called fields. And I can address this collection either numerically or by the name of each of the fields. So I could say, this wasn't zero-based, by the way, I could say field sub 0, that would just be whatever the first column is. Field sub 1, that's the second column. In this case, I don't really care what order they're in, but I want the name. I can get it by its name, so first name. And I don't want the name of that field, I don't want the actual size of that field, or the data format, I want the value.
I assume that first name, no capital, no space, is how you entered it into the server.
So yeah, this is referring to the column names as defined by whoever created this table. We loaded these many years ago.
Does capitalization matter?
Question is, does capitalization matter? And the answer is, it does not matter for SQL Server. There are some databases where capitalization does matter. MySQL, for instance, if you're dealing with MySQL database, capitalization matters for table names, but not for column names. It's kind of quirky. But for SQL Server, it's not case sensitive. But, to make you happy, I'll put that capitalization. Now, I better do something to increment row number 2, or the row, so r equals r plus 1. That'll change which row I'm writing to each time.
So the second one should be r comma 1.
Oh, thank you. This should be 2. Good. This should be column 2. Yeah, so I'm going to write into the first column, whatever row I'm on, the first column will be the first name. Whatever row I'm on, the second column will be the last name. Thank you. And we could do more. So the point here, though, is that not just to create a loop that dumps off the data. I mean, if I want to dump off the data, use copy from record set. It built it, and it's way faster, by the way, than iterating across the record set. But maybe I'm looking for something in here, or maybe I've got to take each record, do some modification, and then insert that to another database or something. This is just an example of kind of the structure that it takes to process that. So why don't I go ahead and no, I'll write it just like this. So now I'm going to write. I should probably save this. Put it in my documents, I think. Don't take so long. Documents, XLSM. I guess I'll just call it database. Oh, you can type that all over left hand. Database, that's neat. Fall. Okay. So now I should be able to run this, and it should just bring in first name and last name from that data set. There it is. So now I brought in just the first name and last name, and I brought in all 56 of them, 156 of them. Questions? Yes.
So that one is just getting the data. Is any way to get the header or
Want to get the field name?
yeah?
Yeah, sure. So let's do this. Maybe even just before I come to this one, before I do this part, I'll say this. And I'll copy both of these. I'll copy these two lines where I'm actually writing the data out. I'm going to put them before the loop. I'm going to modify them a bit. And so this is going to be not row number R, but row number 1. And I'm going to pull the first name.
So it needs to be before TR is open.
Oh, no, thank you. Should be before the loop, but after we've opened the record set. Thank you. And I don't want the value, I want the name. So, and it seems kind of strange to say, give me the name of the record of the field with the name of first name, right? I'm giving it the name that I'm asking for. So here, let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to ask for, I think these are number 1 and number 2. There's a customer number that comes before these that would be number 0. Those aren't the numbers 1 and 2. We'll get some different data. We'll get a different header name. But the point is, you can ask a field for its name. It's the property field. Did it work? So I should be able to run that, and it should pull in that data, and now put the header in as well. Incidentally, the fields is a collection, so we could write a loop that goes across the whole collection, and we could just say, just put in the field names, whatever they are. I don't know what they are, but put 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the whole, you have to count of the fields minus 1, lay them in there. So we really could write a general loop that would take whatever data came back and put it out to a table. But why would we do that when we have this? Right? That's exactly what this does. But there may be reasons that you need to get access to the field names. Okay, so this is the structure that we have to work with if we're going to read data out of a database, process those records one at a time, and decide what to do with it. That's normally where we finish after days. Now moving on to day 2 and content. We might make it. Questions here? Oh, I think we have room for questions. If you have a question, I think we do. I think we're still going to make it. Yeah.
What's the difference between value and name?
Okay, so when you look at a field, remember that record set has access to one record at a time. And so when I'm looking at a particular field in that record set, it has 2 properties. Well, it has more than that. There are 2 kind of really meaningful properties. One is, what's the data that's in that field for that record? And it's Fowler. And then what's the name of that field? The name of that field is last name. So if we look at, like this data right here, all of this whole column shares the column name, or the field name, street address. And then the record set never actually sits on these. It's not like the first record that comes back is the names. It never sits on the names. It starts on the very first row of data, and then you always have access to the name that's from.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. So now we are going to do the process that's the main work for the project that's coming up for your next project. Not to scare you, this next project is the one that students agree is the most difficult project of the year. I used to have this be the very last project of the term. But then you're extra busy on that very last week, coming up to the very last day. So I'm giving you what students agree is a much easier project to end the term off. This is the one that it's really the one that brings together a lot of the things from class. We're reading from a bunch of Excel files and then writing into a database. So let's see how to write to a database. I'll make another sub procedure up here. Sub, get data, we'll call this write data. In this case, I'm going to get the connection, and I'm only going to be pushing data to it. And so of the two database objects that we've created, record set and connection, which one do I need? I need the connection. The record set is for me to bring data back with. I'm not bringing data back. I'm pushing data into the database. And so I need to create myself a connection. So dim cn as ADODB dot new as new ADODB connection. Thank you. I'm also going to want a connection string. I'm also going to want some SQL.
There needs to be connection, right?
Oh yeah, thank you. Connection string? No, what was the question?
The first one is supposed to be command or
That'd be hard to see from back here. Let me drop it for you. Connection. That's correct. Okay, so now this is all. The great thing about the ActiveX data objects is that I don't have to know anything about. Well, I don't have to know very much about the database that I'm working with. All I have to know is how do I get connected onto that, and then almost everything else is exactly the same. The ActiveX data objects library handles all of the specifics about, well, what do I have to do when working with Oracle? Well, what's different if I have to work with Access? There's often some differences in the way we have to build the SQL for those different targets, but in terms of how do we get records, how do we loop through things, that's all handled exactly the same. And so we need a connection string that will work for Access. Where are we going to find a connection string that will work for Access? Google is our friend. Connection string, Access. Access connection strings. That's the first hit. I could have hit. I'm feeling lucky. Access connection strings. Now the book talks about two different Access engines. Beginning in Excel, beginning with Office 2007, Access went to a different engine. Typically, when you think of Access, you think of it as one piece of software, but it's not. It's two. What does a database approach tell us? You've got front-end software and you've got engine software. That's exactly the same for Access. Everything you see when you're using Microsoft Access is front-end. And then it has a piece of non-visual software that you never work with. That's its engine. Back before 2007, the engine was called the JET engine, J-E-T. It's probably the best example of coming up with a great acronym and then trying to figure out what could that possibly stand for that makes sense. The JET stands for Joint Engine Technology, which is pretty meaningless, but it's not. It's no ordinary engine. It's a jet engine. That's what it is. That's the one that went out in 2007. And the new one is called the ACE engine. And so when we're looking at here, we're looking at different options for Access. We want the one that says ACE. The jet engine does not know how to handle the new Access file, the ACCDB file structure. But then this is the one we want. Let's see, database with password, provider, data source. Is that wrapping? Persist security info false. I'm not sure what that is. I'm sure we don't need it. I'm going to take these first two lines. Actually, I'll take the whole thing. My guess is, whatever that does, it won't hurt to be there. I know it doesn't do that. So connection string, I'm going to paste this in. And that comes on multiple lines. I'm going to bring it all up onto one line. That's kind of ugly. So provider, the ACE engine, up to there. Right, so there's the first little argument here in this connection string. Then we have the data source that we're connecting onto. Ah, that's a problem. What's this data source say? Yeah, that's where's that Access database? I tell you what, it's not at SQL in my folder, my Access file at ACCDB. It's not there. Now, so we're going to do a little trick here. We're going to say, listen, you've got to find the Access database. There's a couple ways we could do this. We could ask the user, where is the database, right? We could pop up the file, the Office file dialog, find the file, let the user navigate to it. It would give us the path, and we could drop that in here. Or we could say, listen, we're just going to assume that the database is in the same place that the workbook is. And then we'll use the path of the workbook to infer where the database is. That'll be a little bit slicker for us. And whoever's using this just has to know, hey, if you move this somewhere, you've got to move the database and the Excel file together. So I'm not even sure I did that. Let me take a look. I think I'm in my documents. And so here is my data.accdb. That's the file. And I thought that was where I saved my workbook, but apparently it wasn't. I'm just going to save my workbook again in that same location. I'm on OneDrive. Don't put me on OneDrive. Good heavens. That was the problem. I think that's where I want to be.
That's one.
Am I on OneDrive still? I'm not sure. Let me do this way. That's this PC documents. You see that? You're trying to get me myself on OneDrive. I don't want to go on OneDrive. You're trying to trick me to put it this PC. There we go. That's where I want. Just go check and see if that's there. There we go. So there. Now I have my database file, database F17, and my Excel file, and then my access file in the same location. So here's the point. Ultimately, I've got to get this string to say the full path to that. Well, I can ask it where this workbook got path. I can ask it for the path. And so if I say this workbook dot path and then concatenate onto that a backslash and then the name of my database file, what was it? My data. .accdb. So now that will give me the full path to my database file as long as it's in the same place where my work. So now I just have to compose this connection string to be smart enough to figure that out instead of having this hard-coded. I mean, the truth is, you could make this example work by just typing in the path to that file. Don't do that! It's not that much harder to make it figure it out. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to highlight the whole part I'm trying to replace, being very careful to leave the equal sign before it and the semicolon after it. I'm going to delete that part out. I'm going to put in 2 double quotes. Right? That gives me part of the string in front, part of the string in back. And then I'm going to concatenate in this expression, which will give me the full path to that data file. So a couple of ampersands in there, and then paste that whole expression in. It's kind of ugly, but we've got a string literal here that stops here, and then concatenate in the results of this expression, and then concatenate on the rest of that connection string. So now I've got a connection string that will find that access table. Questions? How comfortable are you manipulating the string the way we have it here so far? How many of you are going, I totally get that. It would take me a little longer to do it than it took you to do it, but I can totally do it. How many of you are going, is this going to be on the file? The answer is no, but yeah, so I'm hoping that by now in this semester, kind of manipulating the string, you feel a little more comfortable with it.
Did you need that last set of quotes and everything?
This right here?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so this expression right here evaluates to this string. And so, yeah, I've got other stuff that's part of my connection. The truth is, I can get by without this whole parameter. I can get rid of this whole parameter. I'm not sure if it needs a terminating semicolon in the connection string or not. So I think technically, I could probably get rid of that. It'd probably work okay. But I'm just going to leave that in. So let me back up to where I was. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking out that. Right? I built an expression that gives me the real path, and I'm now just replacing that with what I know will splice that value into the string.
So the way I did it is I just did the ampersand of this workbook dot path, and to finish the concatenate, and then put in my data.accdb, and left the rest of it on there. Didn't use the last set of quotes and concatenation.
This part right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, you. Oh, yes. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I don't need that. That's what you're saying. That part we can get rid of. Yeah, because it was just ending that string, starting up the next string. And I was just doing it a little less mindfully. I was saying, do the expression that I want and put it in without even thinking about it. But you're absolutely right. If you want it there, you can leave it where you get that. You see what he's saying here? String, literal, stop it, and glue it onto another string literal. We don't have to terminate the one and start the next one. We did this. I will get rid of it because that's actually better. Okay, So now I'm going to open up, with that connection string, I'm ready to open the connection. So cn.open, O-P-E-N, and then I'll go to the connection string. Now, unless I've put, can you put a username and a password onto an Access database? Yeah. And if you do that, you got to supply the username and the password. But this one doesn't have a username and password on it. And so we don't have to supply the username or password. Let me just go ahead and say cn.close. And at this point, if I run this and it doesn't have an error, I feel like, wow, we're home free. Because that tells me I'm connecting to the database, there's no error, I'm closing the database, I'm okay. It's not very thrilling because it doesn't do anything. But yeah, it executes without error. If there's something in here that makes it so it doesn't like this, like I'm missing the P on provider, and I try to run that, it's like, yeah, you can't do that. So I'll put that P back in there, it's an important P. And it runs without error. So that's good. We're finding the file, we're actually opening the connection, we're closing it. That's the hard part. From here, it's just kind of normal stuff. Ready to do it? Here's what I want to do. You don't need to do this. You're welcome to this along with me. You don't have to. I'm just going to open up this database. There's not a whole lot in it here. It's got just a customer file. There's customer. And it's got first name and last name. And it's got a customer ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert the first name and the last name, and it's going to automatically generate the customer ID. So this is an auto number field. So what I want to do is I want to read the data that we put right here on sheet 3, and I just want to insert all these guys in there. So I am inside this connection between when I open it and close it. I'm going to say SQL equals. SQL equals. I am going to write in structured query language statement. Now, the one I wrote before was to extract data out. That's the select statement. If I want to put data in, it's the insert statement. Insert into. Insert into. Now the name of the table. What's the name of the table? Yeah, we got to make sure that we spell it the way it's spelled in our target database. We're not dealing with the SQL Server database at all here. I mean, we had another procedure that does. And now we're reading data out of Excel and putting it into the SQL Server, and there it is. It's just customer. That's right. So insert into customer. Then in parentheses, I tell it the columns that I want to put data into. I don't want to put anything to customer number because I want the database to fill that out by itself. In fact, because it's an auto number field, if I try to put a value into it, it would reject it. It would say, you can't. I'm not even going to do this query. I put the number. I pick the numbers, buddy. And it won't even do the rest of it. It'll be an error. So I can't specify the customer number. I've got to say first name. F-I-R.
Column number.
Well, can I just say 1, 2, or 2, 3, something here? No, it's got to be the name of the column.
Is there any space between customer and parentheses? Or
Stand by. First name, comma, last name. And there is a space here, but the space isn't required. So I could get rid of that space, it would be okay. Okay, so now I've told it, these are the columns I'm working with. Now I got to tell it the values that I want to put in. Isn't that kind of a weird way to do it to me? I'd rather see it, first name equals something, last name equals something, but that's not the way it is. It's a list of values, and then comma, it's a list of field names, comma, and then we supply, not comma, but another keyword, values. V-A-L-U-S. And then we provide a comma-separated list of values that matches the order right there. So I'm just going to go ahead and put myself in here really quickly. Now, I need to put in my name, first and last name, to match first name, last name here. They're string literal, so I've got to put quotes in. So I'm going to put quote, comma, quote. These are single quotes. It's 2 single quotes, and then comma, 2 single quotes. And that's a double quote here. A double quote looks like 2 single quotes. A lot. But now inside the single quotes, I'll just put me. No, don't put me. Put yourself. Have some pride in your own name, I guess.
And it will automatically put it on to the next line.
So what this says is, we're going to insert new data. And so insert will never write over the top of any data. You're inserting data. It's possible to write over data, but not with the inserts. Okay, so now what this should do is it should open up the connection to this database. It should define this query. Oh, we have to execute that. So we're going to say this. On our connection, there's an execute method. We'll just execute that SQL. So take the connection, execute. And so for queries that are what they call action queries, queries that just do something to the data, you just execute. You don't use a record set for that at all. You just say execute. So this should now, when I run this, it should open up, connect to the database, define the query, execute that query, close the database. And when I come back to my database, it's not here yet. This is because Access is kind of lazy. It doesn't really know that it's happened yet in the interface. So I'm just going to sort it. I'm just going to tell this column to sort. And then that'll cause it to look at the data. You could close the table, open it again, it would be there. But it doesn't show up automatically. And it's really because Access is really meant to be used from Access. And so if the primary use case was data is coming all the time, it would be able to refresh itself, but it expects you to type the data in here through the front end. Yep.
So is that extremely old SQL? Is that almost like a command when we execute that command?
Yes, that's exactly right. The question is, this SQL statement, is that like an executable line? Yeah. So this line right here is an executable line in VBA. This one here is an executable line in VBA. This whole one here is an executable line in VBA, but this part is an executable line for a structured query language. And so all that's happening here is we're defining the statement that we want to execute inside of Access. We're defining that in VBA, we're holding it in VBA, and then we're using the connection object to send that off to Access to be executed. Sounds kind of grim. I hope you don't got the last meal and some final words, but he's going to be executed. That's what's going to happen with the statement. And so that's exactly right. So we have to put it as a string literal here because VBA has no idea what to do with structured query language. It can hold it as characters and we send it somewhere else to be executed. Question?
So, if you're going to put in multiple lines, do you have to define a variable in the SQL, like an array?
Yeah. So the question is, what if we're going to do more? I mean, this is interesting, but I don't want to put, gov Allen in there 156 times or whatever. We want to actually put the data in. Let's take a look. There's lots of different ways to do it. Ultimately, we've got to compose a string that has the values we want to execute, and then we execute that string. There's lots of different ways that we can go. I'm going to show you the way that I like to do it. So let me go ahead and declare a variable to kind of go across the rows. dim_r as long. I'm so excited. All right, and so now inside my connection, but kind of around this SQL statement, I'm going to say r equals 2, do until cells. I'm going to assume the active sheet, r comma 1 dot value is blank. Then I'm going to do my SQL stuff and execute. Then I'm going to say r equals r plus 1, and then I'm going to loop. Okay, now the question is, how do I get the values in here? Now, what I could do is I could just come in here, and I could say, I just want to, just like we did up here, I could kind of splice in an expression that reads that value off of the sheet. Right? I could do that. That ends up getting really ugly, composing a structured query language statement that way, because having just 2 fields to enter, that's pretty unusual. Usually it's like 12 or more. And so if I kind of have this, it'll be a huge long line, and it's going to have all this splicing. There's going to be commas and single quotes and double quotes and ampersands, and I'm going to go crazy. So here I'm going to do instead. Instead, I'm going to parameterize this. I'm just going to put angle brackets in there. It doesn't really matter what I do, as long as it's something that I don't kind of stumble across in the data. I'm just going to put that capital FN. And then here, angle brackets again, capital LN. If I'm dealing with data that has like angle brackets in it, this would be a bad choice because I might stumble across what I'm about to do. It's important not to accidentally have that in there. So I could do something like this, angle bracket tilde. It doesn't matter as long as it's, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of use that as the parameter for me to replace. I just want to have something there that I'm comfortable enough to saying, that's not going to be the data that I'm working with. So now that's going to be like my template. I could like build this outside of the loop as the template and then, modify the template, but I'm just going to redefine this each time inside the loop. And now I will say SQL equals replace. Use a replace function looking at SQL, looking for my first template. And what am I going to replace it with? Cells r1 dot value. So this says, we're now on a particular row. I want to take whatever in column 1 of that row. I want to look at my query, find angle bracket, tilde, first name, whatever, and replace it with the value from the worksheet. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other parameter. I'm going to find the last name, and I'm going to replace it with whatever is in column 2. Might make sense for me now to do a print of that SQL so I can see what's going on. Debug.print, let's print X, and let's print SQL. And then we'll execute that statement.
R.
I mean R, thank you. Run that, and it's said, give me the insert statement, and I can see it's built. These insert statements look fabulous. Look at it. Insert into customer, first name, last name, values. Aline Higgins, Lois Fitzgerald, Michael Whitelaw, Dean Yi Chen. And now if I come back here and do a sort again, we'll see all those names came in. Customer ID automatically generates the database doing what it does. Notice add a new number in there, it does that. And the rest of these values are here. 157. Why 157 instead of 156? I added myself first, yeah. That wasn't part of the data, that was just my prior run. Now, this, yeah. So this is one of many ways that I can get that SQL statement to be just what I want it to be. It's one that I prefer. It's pretty simple. It's very readable. The lines don't get to be hugely long, and we can work with them. All right, 2 more ideas I want to cover in the next 4 minutes. One is this: what happens if we're looking at our data over here, and it's not Fowler? We have a little more. We have a little more Irishness. It's O'Fowler. Oh, here's a great Irish name. This is a good traditional Irish name. O Yusuf. Okay. Seems like not such a big deal. I mean, it's a respectable Irish name. I'm just going to run this again, but what's going to happen? Oh my heavens, what's going to happen? Let me run this. Oh, wait, that's not it. Oh, there's an error. Syntax error. Here it is. I printed out. What is wrong with this? It's the single quote right here. I mean, think about it. The access is looking at this. It's going, oh great, I got some kind of process. Insert. I know what that is. Insert into. Oh great, this is interesting. Customer. Oh, that's a table. I'm right there. Oh look, it's got first name, last name. I know what those are. Values. And it goes quote, quin, quote. That's a string literal. Perfect. You want me to put that the first name, and then the last name is quote, oh quote. That's the last name. And it goes, the heck is Fowler? I know what that is. I was expecting a closing parenthesis. I was done, and you said Fowler. So that's the same problem we have in VBA, where we want to put a double quote inside a double quote terminated string. So we solve it exactly the same way. What do we have to do here? Yeah, this has to end up being a double single quote. We have 2 single quotes. So here's what I'm going to do, is that instead of just plugging this in, I'm going to do this. I'm going to wrap a replace around this. So I'm going to look at this thing here up to value, comma. Let me just go ahead and put some quotes in here. I'm going to put in a couple of quote pairs. Quote, quote, comma, quote, quote, close parentheses. I want to get the syntax in there, and then I want to come and think about. So these are both empty strings right now. I want to think about what am I looking for and what do I have to replace it with. So that's it. What am I looking for? What do I have to replace it with? That's right. I'm looking for this gets ugly. I'm right here between 2 double quotes. Single quote. I want to come here and replace it with quote, quote. Yeah, that's ugly. If you're not quite sure, you highlight across. Okay, that's a double quote. Single quote, single quote, that's a double quote. And I like that so much, I'm actually going to copy that and just change the 2 back on the next one.
Okay, now if I run that, it should execute without an error. Yep.
Sorry, I just stepped behind you. What are those again? They're all single quotes?
No.
Double quote with a single quote inside.
Yeah, this one's a double quote with one single quote inside of it.
Yeah.
This is a double quote with two single quotes inside of it. Well, folks, we're almost there. The last kind of gotcha we have here. And that is, it turns out that in the world of database management, there are two different ideas. An empty string, which to you looks like a whole lot like nothing, is really different than the absence of a value. If I put a zero-length string into a database column, it goes great. It's a string with no characters. But if I just don't put anything into that column, it's going, oh yeah, there's no value. And it does not. To you, a zero-length string and no value, they look exactly the same. To a database, they don't look anything like each other. And so there's a specific concept in database management called null. It's a key word, N-U-L-L. And if I want to say I'm inserting all these values, one of these, just skip them, I've got two approaches. One, I can build my insert statement so it doesn't include that. So if I'm looking and we've got a record that doesn't have a last name, we can either have a little more sophistication here so it doesn't include this or this in the template. Or, after I build it, I can kind of go back and look at it again. So let's do this. I'm going to take out Fisher. I'm not sure I'd have Ricky without a last name, but with no last name. So now, let me put a breakpoint here. So when I get here, I think is that the second row? Yeah. So the first one should be okay. It should come up here and print Fisher. Or James, Dominic, that's fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and execute that one. We'll come here. Here's the next one. Okay. So here's Ricky without anything inside. So I really don't want to insert a zero-length string. I want to convert that to, say, N-U-L-L. And so I want to do that like right here. We don't have time to do that. So let's meet on next Monday. No, I'm just kidding. We'll finish off this last part next time we get together. But I think we're actually to the point where we can skip class on Monday. So take the whole week off next week. Maybe I can get you to clap for me somehow. If I canceled the rest of the term, you guys would probably be in the standing ovation.